All right, this was a crazy little 3-minute game just for goofing around. Had a couple of good ideas that came up. Something to show you just so you can see what happens. Played this Sicilian defense. You don't see queen d4 very often because knight c6, and you know, you're getting some action here. Worked out okay. Wasn't terrible for him. I don't know if this guy really has experience. It didn't seem like it to me, but you know, whatever. I'll show you what came up. Castle's long, which is a good move. Bishop e7. Now the thing that white normally does here is he plays bishop takes knight, g takes f6, because you need the bishop to guard the d6 square. So you're not avoiding the doubling of the pawns. But it's as if he did not know that. Like, okay, whatever, dude. So here, let me move this knight over here. Which is okay. I mean, it's not the greatest move. Should have castled first and then done knight to e5. But, you know, whatever. So I just wanted to stop him. I wanted to get that rook to d8 to defend the pawn. So, you know, game in 3 minutes, you just play the move that comes to your mind. I thought about playing knight to d5, but I figured he's going to play knight. I figured he'd play knight takes d5. It didn't really occur to me that I would have bishop to g5 check. Knight to d5 was my gut reaction, and it is the correct move. But I played knight to d7 because in game in 3 minutes, I'm not going to spend a lot of time calculating this garbage. I'm like, I don't worry about this, whatever. As long as his knight doesn't get to d6, I'm good. He can put the rook on d6 if he wants, but he didn't. And that's his problem, not mine. If you put a rook d6, you know, I would play knight takes e5. Knight on d7 would take e5, so, and I took it anyway. And after I take this, he's in bad shape. Now I haven't castled, but so what? That's what my dad would say. So what? You don't have any weaknesses. You don't have to castle. My king is more valuable on e7, holding the d file for the rooks, than it is castled behind the wall of pawns with no attack. He never moved that c4 bishop. Look at this. He's played. We're now into a late middle game. He still hasn't moved the c4 bishop. The only piece that black hasn't moved is the a8 rook, but with the pawn opened up, hey, it's actually semi-developed. So, you know, whatever. You know, he doesn't really have anything special. Maybe bishop e2 is a little better. Because he just didn't see my idea, I guess. I don't know. Or didn't, you know, he discounted it, whatever it was. Don't know. I'm like, man, I'll kill that bishop. You're not going to, you know, do anything with that jerk. I'm not letting him go to e4, let's put it that way. And I'm not letting him turn this backwards chump into a super bishop on e4. That was not happening. So I'm like, dude, that isn't the way to, I don't think I would have traded a rook there, but that's his business. He needs to play rook to d1. He did not. So, needless to say, crunch. After knight to b4 crunch, this game is now over. I'm not even going to waste your time showing it to you. You know, he went like king to b3, which was, it's terrible. King to b3, and I took this. He played rook to d1, I checked him. He went back, I traded rooks, so it's a knight and 4 pawns against knight and 6 pawns. These pawns are weak, but it's 4 versus 2 on the king side. Forget about it. he didn't last long. Let's put it that way. So he needed to go back instead of king to c2, which is a good idea. He needs to play this. Now the problem he runs into here, and it's not a big deal, it's a temporary problem. He can still play king c1, king d2. It's not a problem, really. You know, knight is going to go to d4 and just kind of restricting his pieces. It's by no means won, but it prevents him from exploiting the weakness of the b6 pawn is by putting a knight here. These pawns are weak, but their weakness is the weakness of the doubled pawns is the square in front of the double pawns. He can't really exploit this, so indirectly the weakness is negated. So they actually do a good job of guarding these other squares. So it's like, it's one of those rare cases. Is it a weakness? Absolutely. Can he get to it? No. And really, if he can't get to it, it's just an ugly thing. It's still good. What the problem he's going to face is something along the lines of rook to c8, c5, and an e5 or e5 or f5 infiltration. There's nothing he could do. Well, not nothing, but eventually he's going to fail to be able to withstand the infiltration. That's what's going to get him. You know, also I could play e5, rook d6, and infiltrate, you know, on f6 as well. So whatever. Or rook to a8, rook to a5, keeping an eye on this pawn, making him waste a move. So, you know, he would play like this move most likely. This move is a real possibility. It doesn't really do anything specifically, but it would force him. He can't move this knight until he moves this pawn. So essentially, instead of playing rook to c8, which does nothing, there's no threat here. There's no lasting threat. b5, and then he would just, you know, block that with a3. Okay, I can't really win this knight. This is a legitimate threat that he can't move this knight under any circumstance, like knight to e4, without just dropping this pawn, and then he's completely dead. He'd be completely dead. So the time I'm going to need to move my rook somewhere off of this d file so I can get to the 5th rank. So this one gets there with the, I spend a tempo, he spends a tempo, so it's a neutral. Here he doesn't have to spend one. He could go ahead and continue forward with his, instead of a3, he could continue here and try to kick my knight out, or his king is getting to the defensive side. Okay. I'm sorry, that was if I go like rook to c8. If I go rook to c8, he plays this move. You know, and he's losing, but he has chances. So what we're doing here is by playing rook to c8, we're reducing the chances that he has by hitting rook to a5. Now we've got rook to e5, or rook to f5, or even rook to g5. So there's possibilities now for the rook that weren't there before. I mean, this rook to e5 could be a problem for him, maybe with a knight to b3 check, followed by a knight to c5. That's one possibility. I mean, it would have a pawn fork here, so I have to address that first. But he's got some weaknesses to exploit. You know, rook to e5 looks pretty good because we also have knight to f5. We could get into his position with either knight to e3 or knight to g3. So he has problems that make his life difficult. It's not, you know, completely shredded. He's losing, but you know, he's alive in this version. In this reality, he's only a pawn down. and my extra pawn is not as big. It's, you know, there's essentially, we have 4 versus 3. So black is winning, has an advantage, but that's, you know, it's not a, you know, there's a lot of meat left in the bone, as they say. But the way it happened, when he made the mistake of king to c2, well, there's no game here. He's just dead. It's just a matter of, you know, how soon do we bury him? This is just absolutely atrocious for white. So that's the deal. So you get a little, you know, observation of, you know, what's going on here. Just something interesting. So, you know, hopefully you enjoyed this little quickie and you know what to do. So I'll talk to you later.